I still remember the wind that day, and that strange feeling of waiting for someone who might never return. It's funny how some promises made when we're young start to feel like ghosts. Not because we want to forget them, but because they settle so deep inside us, buried beneath years and growing pains, that when they resurface, it almost feels like they belong to a past life. I was just 17 when I met Noah. And I don't mean met like we bumped into each other at a party or got introduced by friends. No, I recognized Noah as if he had always existed in some secret corner of me, long before I understood what love even meant. We were neighbors in a quiet little street just outside Boston. We'd lived only a few houses apart our entire lives, but it wasn't until our senior year of high school that we actually started talking. He was quiet, thoughtful, with this beautiful way of listening, like your words were sacred somehow. I, on the other hand, was a whirlwind. Loud laughs, fast plans, endless dreams. But something about him made me slow down. It was like the world held its breath every time he looked at me. We were opposites in so many ways, but together, we made perfect sense. I remember the exact moment we made the promise. We were sitting on the front porch of my grandmother's house, sipping sweet tea, watching the sky change colors. There was a sunset that looked like something straight out of a painting, fiery orange melting into soft lavender. I was trying not to cry because he had just told me he was moving to Chicago for college. And even though we hadn't called it love yet, I knew it felt like losing something too rare to name. That's when he looked at me, a little too serious, and said, "If we're still single when we're 30, meet me at the park. The bench by the lake. October 15th. No excuses." I laughed, because it sounded like something from a rom-com, sweet, silly, dramatic. But a part of me took it seriously. That night, I wrote it in my journal, Noah. Me. 30 years old. The bench by the lake. A promise. Time passed. Life happened. And we drifted, gently, painfully, out of each other's lives. I moved to New York for photography school. He headed to the Midwest to study engineering. We exchanged a few texts in the beginning. A couple of late-night calls. But then the replies got slower. The silence stretched longer. We both started living different lives, with new people and new routines that didn't include each other anymore. I had relationships. I had heartbreaks. I grew, changed. And I'll be honest, sometimes I forgot the promise. Or maybe I just pretended to, because remembering hurt too much, but every October, without fail, my heart would tighten a little. Something about that date, it never really left me. It lived quietly in the background, like a forgotten melody that still knows how to break your heart. So when I turned 30, I knew I had to go. Not for him. Not even for the girl I used to be. I had to go for the part of me that still believed in a kind of love that could outlive time itself. That morning, I took my time getting ready. I wore a soft blue sweater, the same color as the shirt he wore the day we made the promise. I let my hair fall naturally, wild from the autumn breeze. The air was crisp, and the leaves were already starting to turn. Walking through the park felt like stepping into a memory that had been patiently waiting for me to return. The bench was still there. Weathered, a little crooked, but solid. I sat down slowly, holding something in my hand, a letter I had written to him the week before. I hadn't planned to give it to him. I wasn't even sure he'd come. But writing it helped me breathe. Helped me make sense of the weight I had carried all these years. The letter said, "If you're here, thank you for keeping the promise. And if you're not, I hope life has been kind to you." I checked the time. It was 3:15. The exact time we made the promise 13 years ago. I waited 15 minutes, 30 an hour. I watched every person that passed, hoping. Maybe that man with the coffee? No. The one walking the dog? No again. My heart jumped at every footstep. Every rustle of leaves, but none of them were Noah.by 4 o'clock. I started to accept it. Maybe he'd forgotten. Maybe life had taken him too far away. Or maybe he'd moved on, and I was the only one still holding on to something that no longer mattered. I stood up slowly, feeling heavier than I expected. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness, really. It was more like an ache. A quiet, gentle ache for something that could have been. I turned to leave, already imagining the drive home, trying to silence the questions in my chest, when I noticed something there. On the bench where I had been sitting was a folded piece of paper. It hadn't been there before, I was sure of it. I picked it up, hands trembling. The handwriting was unmistakable. I hadn't seen it in over a decade, but I recognized it instantly. It said, "I'm sorry I couldn't make it. I tried. With all my heart. Noah *, if you believe in the kind of love that doesn't fade with time, stay with me. Because this story isn't over yet." I didn't open the letter right away. My hands were trembling, and my heart was doing that thing it used to do when I was 17, and he looked at me like I was the only girl in the universe. For a long moment, I just stood there in front of that old wooden bench, holding the note like it might dissolve if I breathed too hard. The words were so simple. So heartbreakingly Noah. I'm sorry I couldn't make it. I tried. With all my heart. That was it. Nothing more. No explanation. No signature, just Noah. I sat back down, stunned. The sky had turned a soft gold, the kind of light that makes everything feel nostalgic. I closed my eyes and tried to slow my breathing. My mind was spinning. He had been here. Or maybe someone else had brought the note for him. Maybe he couldn't come. Maybe I forced myself to stop guessing. That was always my problem. I tried to read too much into silences. Noah never said more than he had to. That was one of the things I loved about him, his quiet honesty. He was never a man of grand gestures. He spoke through moments, through presence, through simple truths. And now, this note, this tiny folded square of paper, felt more powerful than any speech, but it also left me with a storm of questions. Where was he now? Why couldn't he come? What had happened between the promise and today? The next morning, I couldn't focus on anything. I skipped work, called in sick. My apartment in Brooklyn felt too loud, too bright, too full of unanswered memories. I opened a box of old photos I hadn't touched in years. And there he was, smiling in every shot like he knew something the rest of us didn't. That smile that didn't show all his teeth, the one that made you feel like he saw right through the surface of things. One photo stopped me cold. It was from our last day together before he left for college. We were sitting on the back of his truck, eating vanilla milkshakes. My eyes were closed from laughing, and he was looking at me, not the camera. Just me. Like I was something worth remembering. I hadn't cried when he moved away. I was stubborn. I told myself that letting go gracefully was better than making it harder. But now I cried like I was 17 all over again, and he had just driven away, taking pieces of me with him I hadn't even known I'd given. After wiping my tears, I picked up the letter again. I turned it over, hoping, irrationally, that maybe he had written something on the back. There was nothing. But then, as I brought it closer to my face, I noticed something faint in the corner. A small, almost invisible stamp pressed into the paper. Cedar Lake in Room 14. I didn't know why, but my heart stopped. Cedar Lake was a small, almost forgotten lodge in Vermont. It was the place Noah's parents used to take him every summer. He told me about it once when we were lying in the grass, looking up at the stars. He said he loved how quiet it was there, how the lake reflected the sky at night, how the air smelled like pine and freedom. It was his favorite place in the world. He always said he'd take me there someday, but he never did, until maybe, now, it was impulsive. It was reckless. But within 2 hours, I had packed a small bag, left a note on my kitchen counter in case I disappeared off the face of the earth, and booked a last-minute rental car. I didn't tell anyone. I just drove. Through the traffic, through the wind, through the weight of a million unspoken feelings. I didn't know if he'd be there. I didn't even know if the stamp was real or just a coincidence. But I had to go. I had to see. The drive to Vermont felt endless. Every mile seemed to stretch with possibilities. I tried not to imagine what I'd find. I tried not to hope too loudly. But when I finally turned off the main road onto the gravel path that led to Cedar Lake Inn, I swear my breath caught in my chest. It looked exactly like he had described it. Wooden cabins nestled under tall trees. A quiet lake glistening under the early evening sky. There was a soft wind, and I could hear the faint sound of someone playing an old piano in the main lodge. I went straight to the front desk. My voice was shaking. Hi, is there a guest in room 14? The woman behind the counter looked at me kindly. There was. He checked out this morning. My heart sank, but then she leaned in slightly and said, he left this for you. She handed me a white envelope, sealed. My fingers trembled as I took it. The front said only one thing, open by the lake. I walked outside, clutching it against my chest. The path down to the water was lined with lanterns, probably for weddings or evening guests. But for me, it felt like something sacred. Like a trail meant for this moment alone. I sat on the wooden dock. Took a deep breath. I unfolded the letter slowly, almost afraid of what I'd find inside. The paper was thick and slightly wrinkled at the edges, like it had been held too many times. Noah's handwriting filled the page, careful and familiar, every loop and curve exactly as I remembered it. I read the first line aloud, my voice barely a whisper over the quiet lapping of the lake water. If you're reading this, it means you still remember our promise. I always hoped you would. I pressed the page to my chest for a moment. Then I kept reading. I wish I could be there. I wish more than anything that I could sit next to you right now, tell you all of this face to face. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that life doesn't always wait for perfect timing. Sometimes it just happens the way it's meant to, even if it's not the way we imagined. My hands tightened around the letter. A strange weight began to build in my chest. There are things I should have told you a long time ago. Things I carried with me every day, even when we weren't speaking, even when we were living separate lives. The truth is, I never forgot you. I never forgot the girl who believed in forever when we were still too young to know what that meant. I could feel tears brimming in my eyes. The air felt heavier, or maybe it was just me sinking deeper into the words. I tried to reach out once, about 5 years ago. You were in a photo exhibit in Manhattan. I saw a picture of yours online, an old man holding a balloon, standing alone in a crowd. The caption said, "Some people are still waiting." That hit me like a train, because I was still waiting, too. That photo. I remembered it vividly. I'd taken it in Central Park during a rainy afternoon, and I never told anyone what it meant. But it was about Noah. About me. About us. I didn't have the courage to contact you then. I didn't know if it would be fair. I was already sick, and I didn't want to pull you into something I couldn't promise would last. But I never stopped thinking about you. That never changed. I froze, sick. The word echoed in my mind like thunder in an empty room. I could feel it, what was coming, rising like a wave about to crash. Last year, I was diagnosed with a rare heart condition. It's one of those things where you look fine on the outside, until you don't. I tried everything, every treatment, every suggestion. I wanted time. I thought I had more time. But the truth is, I don't know how long I have left. I stopped reading for a moment. I couldn't. The pain was too raw, too sudden. I wiped my face, only to feel new tears falling, one after the other, soaking the letter in my hands. My voice cracked when I finally continued. That's why I came here. To Cedar Lake. I thought, maybe if you remembered our promise, and maybe if you showed up, I could see you again. Even just for a minute. I checked in and waited, like we used to wait for stars to appear in the summer sky. But I wasn't strong enough to stay. My body wouldn't let me. So I left this letter instead, hoping you'd still find it. The lake shimmered in front of me, golden and still. My chest ached, not the kind of ache that fades, but the kind that plants itself deep. Permanent. I didn't want you to remember me as someone who disappeared. I wanted you to know that I remembered. Every laugh, every song we danced to in your room, every word we whispered in the dark. I kept them all. They were the brightest part of my life. You were. I closed my eyes as the wind brushed against my cheeks like fingertips. I could almost feel him there beside me. If this is goodbye, then I hope it's a soft one. I hope you look at the sky and smile sometimes, knowing that someone, somewhere, is grateful he got to love you. Even from a distance. I'll always be grateful. Noah, I didn't realize how long I sat there after finishing the letter. It could have been 5 minutes or an hour. Time stopped making sense. My entire body felt like it was humming, sadness and beauty woven so tightly together I couldn't tell them apart. He had waited all this time, and even though life had been unkind, even though we had been separated by more than just miles or silence, his love had found its way to me, not with a grand entrance, not with flowers or fanfare, but with a folded letter on a bench, and somehow that felt like the most romantic thing in the world. I stayed on the dock until the sun had nearly disappeared behind the trees, watching the light slip slowly across the lake like it didn't want to leave either. I read Noah's letter again. Then a third time. I couldn't stop. Each word felt like it carried a different weight the second and third time around, soaked in a kind of love I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath for all these years. The dock creaked beneath me when I finally stood. My legs were stiff, my cheeks tight from dried tears. I clutched the letter to my chest like it was something holy. In a way, it was. It was the last real piece of him I had. I walked slowly back up the hill toward the inn. Everything around me felt dreamlike. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do now. Part of me wanted to drive straight home, crawl under the covers, and let the world pause for a while. But something wouldn't let me leave just yet. I stopped by the front desk again. The same woman from before was still there, now sipping tea and reading a book. "Excuse me," I said softly. She looked up and smiled, recognizing me. "Did you find the letter?" I nodded. "I did. Thank you." She studied me for a moment. "He spoke about you, you know. The day he checked in." My heart did that stuttering thing again. "He did?" She set her tea down gently. Said he was waiting for a woman. That she was brave and kind. That he didn't know if she'd come, but that if she did, he wanted her to feel peace here. She paused. He seemed tired, but full of love. Like he was carrying something important. I swallowed the knot in my throat. Did he leave anything else? Any instructions, or? The woman thought for a second. Then she opened a drawer behind the desk and pulled out a small black key. He paid for one more night in the cabin by the edge of the lake. Said if you showed up, he wanted you to have it. Just one night. To remember. I stared at the key. In her hand, stunned, room 16. Without a word, I took it. The cabin was small and quiet, tucked beneath a row of pines. As I walked inside, I could smell cedar and old books. A fire had been started in the stone fireplace, though it was now just glowing embers. There was a mug beside the hearth, still with a ring of tea dried at the bottom. He had been there. Just yesterday. Just hours before me. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. The room was simple. A bookshelf, a writing desk, a photograph. On the wall of the lake at sunrise. There was a flannel blanket folded at the foot of the bed. And on the windowsill, a small box. I walked over slowly, not sure what to expect. The box was made of dark wood and had a tiny silver latch. When I opened it, I found two things inside. The first was a photograph, an old one. It was us. From high school. Sitting on the hood of his truck. My head on his shoulder, his hand holding mine, the sunset behind us so bright we were nearly silhouettes. I didn't even know he had this picture. I'd forgotten it existed. But somehow, he had kept it. All this time, the second item was a cassette tape, yes, a real, honest-to-God cassette. With a handwritten label in faded ink, for Emily, one last song. I let out a soft laugh through my tears. He always loved old things. He used to joke that he was born in the wrong decade. Vinyl, Polaroids, cassettes. He said everything sounded more honest when it wasn't perfect. There was a cassette player on the desk. I pressed play, and then I heard his voice. Hey, Em. If you're hearing this. I guess we didn't get to sit on that bench together after all. But maybe this is close enough. My knees gave out and I sank to the floor, back against the bed. As his voice filled the room. I've been thinking a lot about time. About how it passes whether we're ready or not. And how sometimes we miss things, not because we don't care, but because we're scared. I was scared, Em. Scared that if I came back into your life too late, I'd ruin everything good you'd built. I didn't want to be another crack in the foundation. But even in the silence, I loved you. Always did. Maybe not in the way love stories are written, but in the way you remember someone every time you hear their favorite song. Or smell a certain kind of rain. You were never out of my heart. The tape crackled for a moment, and then music began. It was our song. A slow, quiet version of Moon River, the same one we danced to in my room the night before graduation. The one he sang softly into my ear, off-key and beautiful, while the rest of the world seemed to disappear. I closed my eyes and let the music wrap around me like a blanket. I cried again, but this time the tears were different. Softer. Not just from grief, but from gratitude. Because somehow, even after all this time, he had found a way to keep our promise. He had remembered. He had come, just not in the way I expected, and maybe that was enough. And opened the envelope. I must have listened to that tape 3 times, not because I didn't understand what he was saying, but because I wasn't ready to let his voice go. There's something about hearing someone's voice after so long, it breaks you open in a way that nothing else can. It's not just sound, it's presence. It's memory. It's every unfinished sentence you've carried in your chest finally finding its echo. After the third listen, I sat in silence. No music. No fire. Just me in that little wooden cabin, wrapped in his flannel blanket, trying to hold on to every second I had left of him. I kept thinking about the day he gave me the promise. Back then, we hadn't even kissed. We weren't officially together. But we were more than friends. There was always something there, always this invisible thread between us pulling gently in both directions. That promise, that silly, beautiful promise to meet again at 30, it had always meant more than we let on. It was never really about being singled. It was about believing that love, real love, could wait. And now, here I was. 30 years old. Sitting in a cabin he had chosen. Listening to his voice through a cassette player, surrounded by the scent of pine and ash and old dreams. Somewhere in the quiet, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke, the sun was barely up. Just a pale ribbon of light stretching across the horizon. I slipped on my boots and walked back down to the lake, the ground soft with morning dew. The water was still. Perfectly still. I sat on the dock again, this time with the photograph he'd left me in my lap. I ran my fingers over the image like I could touch that old version of us, so full of hope, so unaware of how life would scatter us like leaves. I closed my eyes and whispered into the silence, I loved you too, Noah. I'm not sure how long I stayed there, but by the time I stood, I knew I couldn't leave without doing something. I needed to hold on to this moment, not just through memory, but through something tangible. Something alive. On the way back to the cabin, I spotted a small general store on the edge of the property. It was rustic, wooden sign, wind chimes made of spoons, and a carved bear by the door. I stepped inside, greeted by the smell of cinnamon and pine. There, near the back, I found a small leather-bound journal. Simple, brown, unlined. I bought it without thinking twice. Back in the cabin, I opened to the first page and began writing. Dear Noah, you always said words mattered more when they were written. I think I understand now. You gave me a piece of your heart in that letter, in that tape, in everything you left behind. So here's mine in return. I wrote for hours, about the day we met, about the long summers and shared playlists and quiet car rides, about the years we lost, and what I imagined they might have been if we'd found our way back sooner. I wrote like it was the only way to breathe. That night, I built a fire. Not for warmth, but for comfort. I made tea in the old kettle I found under the sink. And I played the tape again, letting his voice fill the cracks in the walls. I knew I'd never hear anything more beautiful than that. When morning came, I packed my bag slowly. I took the tape, the photo, the journal. But I left the flannel blanket on the bed and placed one final note beside it. To whoever stays here next, someone loved someone here. Deeply. Quietly. Truly. If you're looking for proof that love endures, this place holds it. Before leaving, I walked down to the lake one last time. The sun was rising higher now, and the water sparkled like 1,000 tiny mirrors. I pulled the letter from my coat pocket, the one Noah had left on the bench in the park, and I let it go. I opened my hand and watched the breeze lift it gently, carry it toward the lake, and let it land softly on the surface. The paper floated there, turning slowly, until it disappeared into the water. It wasn't letting go. It was letting it live somewhere else, somewhere it belonged, somewhere I no longer had to carry it alone. Driving back to Brooklyn felt like waking up from a dream you weren't ready to leave. The road curved gently through the Vermont hills, past trees that were just beginning to turn gold and crimson. The sun followed me in the rearview mirror, and for a while, I let the silence ride beside me. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't check my phone. I didn't need noise. I needed stillness. I kept glancing at the passenger seat. The cassette player was there, wrapped carefully in a scarf. Next to it, the photo of us on his truck, and the journal I had started in the cabin. It felt like I was bringing pieces of him home with me, not in the haunting way grief can sometimes cling, but gently, like traces of perfume on a worn sweater, and maybe that's what love does when it's real. It lingers in soft places, not loud ones. When I got home, I left my bags at the door and walked straight to the window. My apartment overlooked a quiet little street lined with trees and old brick buildings. Usually I'd pour myself coffee, check emails, scroll through unread messages. But this time, I just stood there, looking at the leaves and thinking about time. We think we have so much of it. We make plans like the future is guaranteed. We postpone phone calls. We say later like it's a promise. But after Noah, I knew better. He had waited 13 years to see me again, and in the end, he was there. In the way only someone who truly loves you can be, without demanding anything in return. That night, I lit a candle and pulled out the journal. I didn't write to him this time. I wrote to myself. You're still here. You still get to wake up. You still get to fall in love. Don't waste that. It sounds simple. But those words changed something in me. I started doing things differently after that. I walked slower. Took the long way home on purpose. Looked strangers in the eyes. Listened to full songs without skipping. I let the world affect me again, like it used to when I was 17 and everything felt brand new, and I started seeing Noah in the smallest moments. In the sound of leaves rustling outside my window. In a man at the corner bodega whistling Moon River. In a photo submission from a student, an elderly couple holding hands on a park bench, exactly like the one we'd promised to meet on. I began leaving little notes for strangers. Inside library books. On cafe napkins. One of them said, "Some promises are worth keeping, even if they're not kept in the way you expect." A part of me wondered if maybe that's what Noah wanted. Not just for me to remember him, but to carry him into the world. To continue something he didn't get the chance to finish. A few weeks later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a manila folder filled with sketches and blueprints. My breath caught in my throat. They were Noah's. I recognized his handwriting immediately, notes in the margins, tiny stars drawn next to his favorite ideas. It was a design for a small house. Simple, 2-bedroom, open windows, a reading nook with a skylight, a porch overlooking the lake. At the bottom of the last page, he had written, "Someday, this is where we'll grow old. Or maybe, where you'll remember that we almost did." I sat with that page in my hands for a long time. I didn't know how he'd arranged for it to be sent. Maybe he'd left it with someone. Maybe it had been waiting for me this whole time. But in that moment, I felt like he was there again, guiding me towards something I hadn't yet seen in myself. He had dreamed of a life for us. Even when we had stopped talking. Even when his body was failing. He had imagined us growing old, and instead of feeling crushed by that, I felt honored, loved, deeply. Stilled, I put the plans in a frame and hung them above my desk. I didn't know yet what I would do with them. But I knew one thing, I wouldn't forget again. I wouldn't leave promises to fade quietly in old notebooks, because Noah didn't just love me. He reminded me how to live. I must have listened to that tape 3 times, not because I didn't understand what he was saying, but because I wasn't ready to let his voice go. There's something about hearing someone's voice after so long, it breaks you open in a way that nothing else can. It's not just sound, it's presence. It's memory. It's every unfinished sentence you've carried in your chest finally finding its echo. After the 3rd listen, I sat in silence. No music. No fire. Just me in that little wooden cabin, wrapped in his flannel blanket, trying to hold on to every second I had left of him. I kept thinking about the day he gave me the promise. Back then, we hadn't even kissed. We weren't officially together. But we were more than friends. There was always something there, always this invisible thread between us pulling gently in both directions. That promise, that silly, beautiful promise to meet again at 30, it had always meant more than we let on. It was never really about being singled. It was about believing that love, real love, could wait. And now, here I was, 30 years old, sitting in a cabin he had chosen, listening to his voice through a cassette player, surrounded by the scent of pine and ash and old dreams. Somewhere in the quiet, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke, the sun was barely up. Just a pale ribbon of light stretching across the horizon. I slipped on my boots and walked back down to the lake, the ground soft with morning dew. The water was still. Perfectly still. I sat on the dock again, this time with the photograph he'd left me in my lap. I ran my fingers over the image like I could touch that old version of us, so full of hope, so unaware of how life would scatter us like leaves. I closed my eyes and whispered into the silence, I loved you too, Noah. I'm not sure how long I stayed there, but by the time I stood, I knew I couldn't leave without doing something. I needed to hold on to this moment, not just through memory, but through something tangible. Something alive. On the way back to the cabin, I spotted a small general store on the edge of the property. It was rustic, wooden sign, wind chimes made of spoons, and a carved bear by the door. I stepped inside, greeted by the smell of cinnamon and pine. There, near the back, I found a small leather-bound journal. Simple, brown, unlined. I bought it without thinking twice. Back in the cabin, I opened to the first page and began writing. Dear Noah, you always said words mattered more when they were written. I think I understand now. You gave me a piece of your heart in that letter, in that tape, in everything you left behind. So here's mine in return. I wrote for hours, about the day we met, about the long summers and shared playlists and quiet car rides, about the years we lost, and what I imagined they might have been if we'd found our way back sooner. I wrote like it was the only way to breathe. That night, I built a fire. Not for warmth, but for comfort. I made tea in the old kettle I found under the sink. And I played the tape again, letting his voice fill the cracks in the walls. I knew I'd never hear anything more beautiful than that. When morning came, I packed my bag slowly. I took the tape, the photo, the journal. But I left the flannel blanket on the bed and placed one final note beside it. To whoever stays here next, someone loved someone here. Deeply. Quietly. Truly. If you're looking for proof that love endures, this place holds it. Before leaving, I walked down to the lake one last time. The sun was rising higher now, and the water sparkled like 1,000 tiny mirrors. I pulled the letter from my coat pocket, the one Noah had left on the bench in the park, and I let it go. I opened my hand and watched the breeze lift it gently, carry it toward the lake, and let it land softly on the surface. The paper floated there, turning slowly, until it disappeared into the water. It wasn't letting go. It was letting it live somewhere else, somewhere it belonged, somewhere I no longer had to carry it alone. Driving back to Brooklyn felt like waking up from a dream you weren't ready to leave. The road curved gently through the Vermont hills, past trees that were just beginning to turn gold and crimson. The sun followed me in the rearview mirror, and for a while, I let the silence ride beside me. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't check my phone. I didn't need noise. I needed stillness. I kept glancing at the passenger seat. The cassette player was there, wrapped carefully in a scarf. Next to it, the photo of us on his truck, and the journal I had started in the cabin. It felt like I was bringing pieces of him home with me, not in the haunting way grief can sometimes cling, but gently, like traces of perfume on a worn sweater. And maybe that's what love does when it's real. It lingers in soft places, not loud ones. When I got home, I left my bags at the door and walked straight to the window. My apartment overlooked a quiet little street lined with trees and old brick buildings. Usually I'd pour myself coffee, check emails, scroll through unread messages. But this time, I just stood there, looking at the leaves and thinking about Time. We think we have so much of it, we make plans like the future is guaranteed. We postpone phone calls. We say later like it's a promise. But after Noah, I knew better. He had waited 13 years to see me again, and in the end, he was there. In the way only someone who truly loves you can be, without demanding anything in return. That night, I lit a candle and pulled out the journal. I didn't write to him this time. I wrote to myself. You're still here. You still get to wake up. You still get to fall in love. Don't waste that. It sounds simple. But those words changed something in me. I started doing things differently after that. I walked slower. Took the long way home on purpose. Looked strangers in the eyes. Listened to full songs without skipping. I let the world affect me again, like it used to when I was 17 and everything felt brand new, and I started seeing Noah in the smallest moments. In the sound of leaves rustling outside my window. In a man at the corner bodega whistling Moon River. In a photo submission from a student, an elderly couple holding hands on a park bench, exactly like the one we'd promised to meet on. I began leaving little notes for strangers. Inside library books. On cafe napkins. One of them said, "Some promises are worth keeping, even if they're not kept in the way you expect." A part of me wondered if maybe that's what Noah wanted. Not just for me to remember him, but to carry him into the world. To continue something he didn't get the chance to finish. A few weeks later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a manila folder filled with sketches and blueprints. My breath caught in my throat. They were Noah's. I recognized his handwriting immediately, notes in the margins, tiny stars drawn next to his favorite ideas. It was a design for a small house. Simple, 2-bedroom, open windows, a reading nook with a skylight, a porch overlooking the lake. At the bottom of the last page, he had written, "Someday, this is where we'll grow old. Or maybe, where you'll remember that we almost did." I sat with that page in my hands for a long time. I didn't know how he'd arranged for it to be sent. Maybe he'd left it with someone. Maybe it had been waiting for me this whole time. But in that moment, I felt like he was there again, guiding me toward something I hadn't yet seen in myself. He had dreamed of a life for us. Even when we had stopped talking. Even when his body was failing. He had imagined us growing old, and instead of feeling crushed by that, I felt honored, loved, deeply. Stilled, I put the plans in a frame and hung them above my desk. I didn't know yet what I would do with them. But I knew one thing: I wouldn't forget again. I wouldn't leave promises to fade quietly in old notebooks, because Noah didn't just love me. He reminded me how to live. I never imagined that grief could lead to blueprints and permit applications, but there I was, 30 years old, sitting in my Brooklyn apartment, researching Vermont zoning laws, learning about foundation pours and cabin insulation like it was a second language. Every tab open on my laptop was about cedar wood, structural beams, tiny house financing, or emotional endurance. I was in over my head, and I knew it, but I also knew I wasn't doing this just for me. I was building something that Noah had imagined. Not just a house, but a space where love could live, even if the people who made the promise weren't both standing in it. And strangely, that thought gave me strength. The first time I visited the land, I went alone. It was late October. The air was crisp, just cold enough to make my breath visible. The trees were mostly bare, their leaves crunching softly beneath my boots. The lake shimmered a quiet silver, and the world around me felt untouched, like time had paused here just long enough for me to catch up. I stood at the edge of the clearing where the cabin would go and closed my eyes. I imagined it: wooden porch, 2 rocking chairs, soft yellow light coming from the windows. I could hear music playing inside, Noah's playlist, probably. I could almost hear him calling my name through the screen door, and for a moment, I let myself believe he was there, not in a ghostly way. In a real way. In the way that love remains. After the body goes, I brought a small notebook with me and started sketching out my thoughts. I wrote down everything I wanted the space to feel like. Not look like, feel like, warmth, gentleness, belonging. Something you could walk into and exhale. That was the first brick I laid. Even if it was only metaphorical, back in the city, I began making calls. I found a local contractor in Vermont who specialized in small, sustainable builds. His name was Daniel. He had kind eyes and a voice that sounded like late-night campfires. When I explained what I was doing, I expected hesitation, maybe even confusion, but instead, he simply said, "Let's make it happen." That first week, I mailed Noah's house plans to Daniel, along with a letter that said, "This isn't just a build. It's a promise. One that deserves to be kept." And then the work began, slow, methodical, filled with setbacks and learning curves. The ground had to be cleared. There were permits to secure, designs to tweak. But through it all, I kept one thing steady: the feeling. That soft hum in my chest that whispered, "This is what love can become when it has nowhere else to go to." I started spending weekends in Vermont. At first, it was just to meet the team, check on the site. But over time, it became something more. A rhythm. A place where my days had a quieter pulse. Mornings started with coffee on a folding chair, wrapped in a blanket, watching the mist rise off the lake. Afternoons were spent walking the property, finding little pieces of Noah in everything: the way sunlight filtered through the trees, the color of the soil, the sound of the wind against the roof frame. One day, Daniel showed me the progress. On the reading nook, it was perfect. A curved window facing the lake, a built-in bench with shelves underneath. I ran my hand along the wood and whispered, "He would have loved this." Daniel smiled gently. "I think he already does." There were nights I sat under the stars, writing in the journal I had started at the cabin, not about grief anymore, about becoming. I thought I was building something for him. But it turns out, I'm building something for us both. Even if I'm the only one who gets to walk through the door. I kept the cassette tape in my car. On long drives back and forth between the city and the site, I'd play Noah's message. Not every time. Just when I needed reminding that this wasn't just nostalgia. It was love continuing. One night, after a long day of framing and sawdust and plans, I fell asleep on the floor of the unfinished cabin. It was just 4 walls and a roof, no insulation yet, no electricity. But I lay there on a sleeping bag, the scent of pine all around me, and felt at peace more than I'd felt in years. Not healed, exactly, but held. It happened quietly. No fireworks. No soundtrack. No sudden revelation, just a conversation. We were standing near the edge of the property, me and Daniel. The frame of the house was finally complete. The walls were going up next week. We had just finished going over some of the electrical placements, and I was absent-mindedly holding a pencil behind my ear like I was someone who actually knew what I was doing. Daniel leaned back against the truck and looked out at the lake. "You ever think about what it'll be like once it's finished?" he asked. I paused. I hadn't, not really. I'd been so wrapped up in the building, the process, the honoring of something lost, that I hadn't let myself imagine the afterward, I guess. "I'll come up on weekends," I said, slowly. "Maybe stay a little longer in the summer. I don't know." He nodded, but I could tell he wanted to say more. So I asked, "Why?" Daniel glanced at me and then looked away again, like he was trying to find the right words in the trees. "It just feels like you're building something meant to be lived in, not visited." I didn't answer. Because deep down, I knew he was right. That night, I stayed in town instead of driving back to the city. There was a small inn with creaky floors and quilts that smelled like lavender and old paper. I sat on the window ledge of my room, legs tucked underneath me, and thought about what Daniel said. "Lived in." The words echoed in my chest. When Noah had drawn those house plans, he didn't do it for a memory. He didn't do it for a ghost. He imagined a life A future. A porch with tea in the morning. A kitchen filled with music. A bed warm with soft light and the scent of someone you loved. He wanted living, and I hadn't let myself do that in a long time. Not really. I had gone through the motions of life since he passed. I had laughed with friends, taken photos, taught classes. But I hadn't let anyone in. Not in the way that mattered. I hadn't risked my heart again. Grief had become a kind of armor, but now something in me was shifting, and part of that shift was Daniel, not in a sweeping, romantic, movie scene kind of way, but in quiet things, the way he always made sure I had gloves before touching cold lumber, the way he asked about my photos and actually listened to the answers, the way he didn't press, just noticed. There was a moment, weeks earlier, when we both reached for the same blueprint at the same time. Our hands touched. Barely, but something lingered. I hadn't thought much of it then. Or maybe I had, and didn't want to, but now, sitting there in that lavender-scented room, I thought about it again. About what it meant to be building something with someone, even if neither of you said it out loud. I opened my journal. What happens when the future you were building is suddenly behind you? And someone gently places a new one in your hands? It wasn't about replacing Noah. It never would be. Some people are carved into you permanently. They become part of the architecture of your soul, but that doesn't mean the rest of the space has to stay empty. The next morning, I woke early and drove back to the cabin site. The mist was heavy, curling over the lake like a blanket. I stepped out of the car and just stood there for a while. Breathing. Listening. Feeling, and then I walked to the back of the house, where the porch would be. I closed my eyes and imagined it, rocking chairs. Coffee mugs. Someone humming a song under their breath, and I didn't picture Noah. I pictured me, older. Softer. Smiling, and someone beside me. Maybe Daniel. Maybe someone else. Maybe even just a version of myself I hadn't met yet, but I was there. I was living, and that was enough. There's a strange quiet that comes when you stop fighting your own heart. It's not loud or sudden. It doesn't announce itself. It just slips in. Like sunlight through sheer curtains. Soft. Slow. Certain. That was how I felt in the weeks that followed. Something in me had softened, not because the grief was gone, but because it had finally found a place to rest. I still missed Noah. I always would. There were days when I'd hear a song, or pass someone who looked just enough like him to make me stop and stare, and I'd feel that familiar ache bloom in my chest. But it didn't feel like drowning anymore. It felt like remembering, and there's a difference. I started spending more time in Vermont. The build was moving quickly. Now, framing complete, walls going up, windows arriving. I watched the space take shape piece by piece, like a memory being made in reverse. Daniel was there most days. We worked side by side, me with my camera, sometimes my notebook, him with his sleeves rolled up, sawdust in his hair. We didn't talk about deep things. Not yet. But there was an ease between us that felt like a conversation without words, and then came the night it shifted. It was early November. The air had turned crisp, and we just finished a long day working on the porch railing. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting everything gold and deep blue. Daniel handed me a mug of coffee, black, exactly how I take it now, because somehow, without ever asking, he just knew. We sat on 2 overturned buckets, facing the lake. Not saying much, and then he said, "You don't have to answer this." But, would he be okay with this? I looked at him. He wasn't asking casually. He was asking with reverence. With caution. With respect for the person who had come before him, and my answer came without hesitation. "Yes," I said softly. He didn't want me to stop living. He just wanted me to remember how. Daniel nodded once and looked back at the water. We didn't touch. We didn't kiss. Nothing dramatic happened, but something opened. A door I hadn't realized was still closed. That night, back at the little inn, I lay awake thinking about the question he'd asked: would Noah be okay with this? And the answer, yes, kept repeating in my head, not as permission, but as truth. Noah had never been the kind of person who held on too tightly. Even when he left gently. He made space. He allowed love to evolve, and maybe that's the most honest kind of love there is, the kind that doesn't end when someone else begins. It doesn't need to compete. It just makes room. The next morning, I found an old tin box in the back of my closet at the inn. Inside were notes from my younger self, lists of dreams, magazine clippings, little sketches. One was a bucket list written when I was 18. The first item said, have a home with windows that open to trees, not traffic. I laughed out loud, because here I was, the life I had once imagined, hidden beneath the noise of a different kind of future, had found its way back to me, but this time, I wasn't chasing it, I was building it, and maybe I didn't have to build it alone. Later that week, Daniel brought me a package. He'd found it among some old toolboxes in the cabin's storage space, left behind from an earlier delivery. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with a string. There was a note on top. For Emily. You'll know when the time is right. Inside was a doorknob, antique brass, worn at the edges, and engraved with a small, delicate letter, E. I sat down on the cabin floor and held it in my hands for a long time. Noah had planned everything, even the moment the door would open, and I suddenly understood, this house wasn't just a goodbye. It was a threshold. I didn't install the doorknob right away. I kept it on the windowsill of the nearly finished cabin, next to a jar of wildflowers I'd picked from the edge of the lake. Every time the morning sun passed through that corner of the room, the metal would glow, soft, warm, and steady, just like him. I would touch it lightly with my fingers, like a charm. Not as a goodbye. Not even as a keepsake. But as a kind of promise, I'm still here. And I'm still moving forward. By the second week of November, the house had walls, paint, electricity. It was no longer a blueprint. It was real, and more than that, it felt like home, not in the way an address does, but in the way a place quietly welcomes every version of you, past, present, and becoming. The kitchen had open shelves, just like Noah drew. The porch was framed, and Daniel had hand-sanded every plank with care, as if he were building something sacred. The reading nook was complete now, cushions, light, and a view of the lake that could still your breath. I found myself spending more and more time there, even before the plumbing was finished. I'd sleep on the floor in a sleeping bag, wake up to birdsong and steam from a borrowed kettle, and feel something I hadn't in a long time, belonging. One night, the stars were particularly clear. Daniel and I sat outside after dinner, 2 chairs, 2 mugs of tea, and silence that didn't ask to be filled. I always wondered, he said, after a long pause, why you stayed in the city so long. You don't really seem like the kind of person who belongs in traffic and sirens. I smiled at that. I guess I forgot what quiet felt like, I said. And what it meant to feel rooted. He nodded. You do now. That sentence landed somewhere deep. You do now, not you might or you could, you do. He didn't mean the house. He meant me. He meant the version of me I had slowly become here, without even realizing it. Later that night, I walked barefoot across the wood floors, the cool grain grounding me. I stood in the middle of the empty bedroom and opened the box where the doorknob had been resting. I held it for a long time, then I opened my toolbox and installed it myself. It took longer than it should have. I wasn't exactly skilled at it. The screws wouldn't catch at first. My hands were shaking. But when it finally clicked into place, and the latch turned, I stood there and exhaled something deep and old. A release. A beginning. The first time I opened the door, I did it slowly, just to feel it move, and it was like stepping into a chapter one didn't know I'd earned. Noah would have laughed at me fussing over something so small, but he would have also understood. He always did. I stood on the porch and watched the moon rise above the trees, and for the first time since I was 17. I felt like I wasn't waiting anymore, not for someone to come back, not for time to rewind, not for the ache to stop. I was just living one slow breath at a time. That weekend, I invited Daniel to help me move the first pieces of furniture in. A bookshelf. A handmade table we'd found at a second-hand shop. A box of books I'd been saving since college. A framed photo of my parents from their wedding day. And in the corner of the living room, a stack of letters I hadn't reread in years, every one of them addressed to me, written in Noah's voice. Daniel didn't ask about them, but he noticed, later, as we sat cross-legged on the porch, sipping cider, he asked gently, "Do you think you'll ever read them again?" I looked out at the lake, golden in the late afternoon light. "Maybe one," I said. "When the time is right." He nodded. "I hope you do." We didn't say anything more that night, but I knew what he meant. He wasn't asking me to let go. He was asking if I'd let love evolve, and the answer was starting to form, not in words yet, but in feeling. I am the steadiness of new mornings. I am the quiet comfort of porch light. I am the way a doorknob can mean not just coming in, but choosing to stay. I used to believe love was linear, that it had a beginning, a middle, an end. You meet someone. You fall. You build a life. And when that life ends, by time, distance, or death, you move on. You start over. Or you don't, but now I know better. Love doesn't follow a straight path. It moves in spirals. In echoes. In moments that seem disconnected until they suddenly make perfect sense. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I opened one of the letters I hadn't planned to. I was organizing books in the new cabin, arranging them by color and then alphabetically, then giving up and going with intuition instead. And the box of letters had just been sitting there in the corner, unopened since I'd brought them up. From Brooklyn, they weren't recent. Some were from high school. Some from the first few months we tried to stay in touch after college. Others were never sent, scraps of writing he must have tucked away, half-formed thoughts never meant to reach me, but one envelope stood out. It had a tiny drawing on the front, a leaf, curling in on itself. I recognized it immediately. It was from the afternoon we skipped class and sat in the park, sharing secrets we hadn't even shared with ourselves yet. I slid my finger under the flap and opened it. *M, I don't know if this letter will ever find you. I've written it in my head a dozen times, but this is the first time I've put it on paper. Maybe because paper feels like it lasts longer than memory. And I need this one to last. I've loved you since before I understood what that meant. Not just the way you smiled or the way you made me feel like the world could be soft, but the way you believed in things. In people. In promises. I'm scared I won't get to keep mine. I don't know how long I have. I don't know how to tell you this in person, so maybe this letter is my way of leaving something behind that won't vanish. If I'm gone, and you find this, I want you to remember this one thing: you were never unfinished. You were always becoming. And if one day, someone shows up who sees you the way I did, don't close the door just because I'm not standing there. Let them in. Let them see the way you look when you're lost in a story. Let them hear the way you hum when you're making tea. Let them feel the way you hold hope, even when it's heavy. Let them love you. You deserve that. Always. I didn't cry right away. I sat there, the letter in my lap, my heart stunned into stillness, because no one knew. He knew what I would need before I did. He knew how hard it would be to choose something new. And he gave me the answer, not in permission, but in understanding. He wasn't stepping aside, he was walking with me. Even now, that night, I lit a candle in the window, not for grief, not for memory, but for light, for whatever comes next. Daniel stopped by later with dinner. We ate on the floor, laughing over cheap takeout and the way my faucet still dripped even after 3 repairs. At one point, I looked at him and said, I read one of Noah's letters today. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. Instead, he asked softly, "How did it feel?" "Like being told it's okay to fall again," I said. Daniel set his chopsticks down. "It is." We sat there, the silence thick with everything we hadn't said yet, and then, without fanfare, without pressure, he reached out and held my hand, not tightly, just enough, the kind of touch that says, "I see the whole of you. And I'm not afraid of it." And I realized, this was what Noah had wanted for me, not to forget him, but to be loved again. In a new shape. With a new rhythm. By someone who wasn't trying to replace anything, but to build something beside what had already been. That night, I wrote in my journal, *, you can carry more than one love. You can hold memory in one hand, and possibility in the other. And somehow, miraculously, they don't cancel each other out. They make each other deeper. ***. The cabin was finished 2 days before Christmas. No ribbon cutting. No celebration. Just quiet. The kind that settles into the corners of a room when the work is done and something sacred has taken shape. I remember unlocking the door for the first time, not as a visitor, or a builder, or someone in mourning, but as someone coming home. Everything was exactly how I imagined it: the warm wood, the clean lines, the porch with its creaky railing and wide open view of the lake. The scent of cedar and fresh paint still lingered, and the floor creaked in that comforting way only new homes do, as if the space itself was waking up beside me. There was no furniture yet in the bedroom, just a mattress on the floor, a wool blanket, and a single framed photo on the nightstand, the one of Noah and me on the back of his truck, laughing, somewhere in between growing up and falling in love. That night, I lit the fireplace and sat on the floor with a mug of tea, the room bathed in soft orange light. Snow had started falling outside, light at first, then steadier, quieting the trees like a lullaby. I thought about everything that had led me here, not just the loss, not just the promise, but the decision to say yes to a life I hadn't planned, but somehow had always belonged to, and I knew what I had to do next. In the morning, I drove to the little post office in town. The woman behind the counter was wearing a green cardigan with silver snowflakes stitched along the sleeves. She smiled when she saw me. "I heard the house is done," she said. "It is," I smiled back. Then I handed her a padded envelope. Inside was a copy of Noah's blueprint, the house he'd drawn, now real. Attached was a letter. *Dear Mr. and Mrs. Carter, I don't know if you remember me, but I was someone your son loved once. I wanted you to know that the house Noah dreamed of, it exists. It's on the land he stood on last spring. Built from his sketches, his heart, his hope. I live there now. And I carry him with me in every sunrise that hits the porch, every star I can see from the reading nook, every piece of peace I've found after all this time. Thank you for raising a man who loved without fear. You gave the world a kind soul. And I will spend my days honoring that. With love, Emily. *. I mailed it without a return address. Some things don't need replies. That night, I hosted my first dinner in the cabin, just me, Daniel, and the quiet sound of cutlery on mismatched plates. We ate by candlelight, snow falling thick outside the windows, the wood stove humming gently in the corner. After dinner, I played the cassette again, the one Noah left me. We didn't speak while it played. We just listened. His voice filled the cabin like he belonged there. And he did. In every corner. In every kindness that made this place possible. When it ended, Daniel reached for my hand. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't say, "He'd be proud." He said, "Thank you for letting me be part of it." I nodded, blinking back tears. Thank you for knowing how. Later that night, as I was curling into bed, I whispered into the quiet, I kept the promise, and I meant it in every way, not just by showing up, not just by building the house, but by staying. By allowing life to reach me again. By holding Noah in one hand, and this new love, in all its patience and grace, in the other. There's a moment every morning, just before the sky shifts from blue-gray to gold, when the world feels completely still. That's when I like to sit by the window in the reading nook, wrapped in a blanket, holding a mug of coffee with both hands, and let the quiet settle in my bones. It's in those moments that I feel closest to everything. To myself. To what came before. To what's yet to come. The cabin is no longer just a structure now. It breathes. It holds music and laughter. And muddy boots by the door. There's a stack of books by the bed, half-read and dog-eared. A basket of sweaters near the fireplace. A grocery list on the fridge held up by a magnet that says, "Be gentle with yourself." And sometimes, a second toothbrush on the bathroom counter. Daniel doesn't live here yet. But he visits often. And when he's here, there's a kind of silence between us that feels like safety, not the kind of silence that asks to be filled, but the kind that means I see you, all of you, and I'm not going anywhere. The other day, he found me sitting on the porch steps after a long walk. In the snow. He handed me a scarf I'd left in his truck and asked, "Do you still think of him every day?" I didn't have to lie, yes. He nodded, smiling softly. Good. That's the thing about real love, it doesn't ask you to choose. It doesn't feel threatened by what came before. It simply holds space for it. I still write to Noah sometimes, not because I'm stuck in the past, but because he's part of the reason I know how to love this fully now. I keep the journal in the drawer of the reading nook. Every few weeks, I'll add an entry. Noah, the daffodils bloomed today. I planted them by the porch in late March. I don't know if I did it right, but they came anyway. Like hope. Like you, and every time I write, I end it with the same words, I'm keeping the promise. Just in a different way now. I've learned something I didn't know when I was 17. Some promises aren't about outcomes, they're about intention, they're about the way we hold people in our hearts. Long after they've stopped walking beside us, they're about building a life that echoes what was beautiful, while still making room for what is. Last weekend, I hung the final photo in the hallway. It's a black and white shot I took of the lake at sunrise, mist curling off the water, a lone bird just taking flight. I called it Becoming. Because that's what this all has been, not starting over, not forgetting, just becoming, day by day. Season by season, turning the page without erasing what came before. I'll always love Noah, and I love Daniel too. One was a beginning. The other is a continuation. Both are true, and I'm allowed to hold them both. Sometimes, I still walk down to that bench by the lake, the same one where it all began. I sit for a while. I breathe. I listen to the wind, and I think, we did it. We kept the promise, not by showing up exactly as planned, but by loving, still. By choosing life, even when it's heavy. By carrying each other forward, even when one of us had to let go.